and welcome to another episode of the Rollwise Podcast, the show where we talk about things related to tabletop RPGs and RPGs themselves. Today, we are going to be kind of tackling a topic. This one was kind of fun. It was, I don't remember if we had necessarily an inspiration for this, but as we were kind of brainstorming ideas of stuff to talk about, this one was kind of a
Well,
fun one.
well, I think the inspiration was the banter about just riding through the town in the Deadlands game.
That's
Like,
true.
we're not
That's
interacting with anything that you set up with. We're just gonna
yeah.
ride. We're just gonna
I
ride
need
it all the way through.
I really need to get rid of this bounty. So there's no sheriff here. Next.
Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit of what made the brain itch a little.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, when we talk about like players and stuff like that, I mean, we've all played games a lot, many years, many situations. And even today, I still feel like I'm learning a ton about how to DM and how to tell good stories and how to collaborate good stories with players and stuff like that. But this is tricky, like because in a game that has infinite player agency, I mean, there's no such thing as rogue because the players are just doing what they're doing. But when you prepare an adventure like Brent did for Savage Deadlands Savage,
Good enough.
and basically, my character, I'm like, okay, now you're in character, Mike. Your character's a bounty hunter and he has a bounty. What do you do? Oh, I gotta turn this bounty in. No sheriff, nobody in town. Next town, I guess. And as the GM, you're like, I prepared an entire adventure of vampire hunting, and what are we doing? Like how do you reconcile those? Um, so I guess first of all, what do you guys think going rogue is in terms of like when the players are like in the context of tabletop RPGs? What would you think that would be?
I think it's when the players are willfully like not picking up the plot hooks. Like they see
Okay.
them, they know they're there, and they're like, we don't want to do that. And I think there's an argument to be made, especially in a lot of modern role playing games, like you said, where there's a lot of player agency, that
Hmm.
some of that's okay. As long as
Hmm.
the GM can find a way to eventually tie things back to, whatever the loose plot for the adventure or the longer adventure, happens to be.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think it's the players willfully trying to do their own thing and make it like kind of adversarial with the GM.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
I think it comes down to players players just not playing the game that you've all decided to play.
Hmm.
I try to think of games that we played where I could think of something that we would have done that would have been going rogue or kind of going against the like the alien game. If we just would have been like, well, we're not going on the ship. Like we're just not gonna go on the ship. Like at that point we've just decided we don't want to play the game. Like at that point we've decided to do nothing in lieu of doing, because we know it's an alien game. Like we know we have to go on the ship. And I think that's when I think that's, for me, that's like the worst point of going rogue. Is it isn't when they make a decision that I'm not totally know was coming, because after, you know 30 years of role playing games, like I can usually ad lib some sort of resolution to whatever's within kind of the narrative that we've all agreed to. Like if you guys honestly, if you guys would have decided, for example, if you guys would have decided to ride through the town um of Riften's Rest instead of staying, like we would have been like, there would have been constitution rolls, because you guys, I would have said, you guys are, this is the next town, you guys are running out of rations, you're tired of riding, you can
Hmm.
make camp, something might have happened at camp to make you go back, stuff like that. There's things that you can do to redirect the players, but if you guys are just like, no, we're not stopping in the town, it's like, oh well, you don't want to play the game that I've designed, and that's a different conversation. And I think that's
Yeah.
the worst, like, because you can always, I mean, I pretty much always expect players to not do what I think they're going to do, so I try to make
Well,
general ideas of what could
Sure.
happen.
there's
Sure.
so many times just playing together where,
Mhm.
as the players, it isn't that we were willfully ignoring a plot hook. It was that we got fascinated by some ornate description
Mhm.
of something inconsequential and got lost for a session or two because we were going down a rabbit hole of our own creation
Mhm.
Uh,
because we were sure it would lead to another clue.
it's kind of like in this game that I ran once, where these players got really hyper fixated on this painting that was in their apartment. And so what I started doing is I started building things around the painting so they could interact with it. Like you can
Mhm.
build the adventure to interact with the thing that
Mhm.
whatever they find is fascinating. Like you can do that. I mean, and that's kind of your job as a person running the game, is the thing that they find interesting that maybe was an accident on your part. Like make it interesting for them. Let them interact with it. Let them do what they want to do with it. Um,
Mhm.
and if that changes your narrative, you just have to kind of compensate for that.
Sure.
But at some point, you do have to say, like, is this the game that we really like? If it's the game that I don't want to run, like, you have to bring that up.
Mhm.
Like if the players are like, I always use this example of, we liberated this theater, this haunted theater. We got this haunted theater. We need to schedule plays now. Like, we need to have we need to have a performance schedule. We need to hire actors. And if you want to play the sim theater game, that's cool, but it has to be fun for me too. Like if that's not the type of
Mhm.
game that I want to play, then maybe we should
Sure.
move on to something else,
Well,
or somebody else can take over.
yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned it there. If you're having a decent session zero, right,
Mhm.
then you're establishing a social contract at least between the person running the game and the people playing the game as to
Mhm.
the type of game, the type of experience that you're all looking for, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, I really think that players truly going rogue
Mhm.
generally only happens when something has happened to break the trust between the person running the game and the players, or at least one
Mhm.
of the players,
Or someone's not happy.
or
Yeah,
some yeah,
someone's not
someone's
happy.
not happy for some reason, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
I focused in on broken trust, but
Mhm.
yeah,
Like
sure.
if you're like I can think of an example, like if you're playing the superhero game and like one person wants to be the Punisher and the rest of the people are the Justice League, like the game's gonna get confrontational pretty fast, because basically the one character's gonna be like, oh, I just killed them all. And
And
then
the other characters are like, we don't do that.
yeah, and the other characters are like, we don't do that, and is like, I'm already doing it. And then it's okay, well now the player character is a villain of the game.
Sure.
Like, and now the whole tone of the game is shifted. And like you can run that game if that's what you want to run, but that's gonna get pretty, that might not be fun for the players.
No,
or
I
get or,
Fairly,
or,
yeah.
or get unfun real fast.
that's a good
Maybe.
example. That's a good example that I didn't consider.
So, because I think that there's a few ways that a quote unquote player could go rogue. They could be making just unexpected decisions, like you as the DM may not have expected, them to go a particular route, which could be fun in its own way. Or they could be disruptive, as you said. Maybe they're not satisfied with how the game is going, and so they just start being a little asshat or something like that at the table. Doing things like, oh, well, I see a bartender, oh, I kill him. And you're
Right.
like, oh,
Yeah. I mean,
why?
that's the thing. Like, that's the thing people worry about when you talk about role playing games, right? Well, how do you know what you can do and what you can't? Or how do you know,
Mhm.
that's the thing in movies or whatever that you always see is like, well, how do you know? And it's like, well, you've accepted this kind of conceptual reality that we're all playing under the same rules. So you
Sure.
can't just
Right.
say, I fly all of a sudden. Like, and if you have that sort of player, like, they've made a decision that they want to ruin your game for some reason.
So here's a
I
question.
feel like that usually doesn't happen. Usually it's
Right.
they're trying to do something that they feel is within the limits of the game or they think is interesting, which I think is important. Like if you can get interactivity
Mhm.
from players, like I think that's ideally what you want. And you have to, you as a GM, Marshall, or whatever, like you have to kind of adjust to the
Mhm.
players doing what they want. Otherwise, go watch a movie or read a book. Like that's
Sure.
not what role playing is, compensating for the
We're all
players.
at the table to have fun.
Yeah,
Now,
role playing
what we
is,
want for fun
yeah,
may vary from party to party, right?
and that's
Person to
what you need to
person.
decide, and that's why you have the
Exactly.
session zero.
That's what you
So
should be talking about. You know,
so the question is we've talked a little bit about that, but how do you prepare your game without railroading characters and possibly developing some of these types of antagonistic situations where the characters don't feel like they have freedom, or they just it's just kind of like
I,
they spice it up, I guess, by killing everybody in the town. You know, how do you guys like? How do you prepare for that without railroading per se?
I think you have to scramble a little bit and improvise and have multiple directions to get to the same endpoint, right? Like if you're just driving across town, there's not just one way to go. There might be the most efficient way to go, and that might be
Mhm.
what I plan for. But I hit construction or an accident or something, and I've got to reroute. I think as a GM, you have to be able to let the players do some of their stuff and have their agency, and then have some way to get back on track. Like if in Brent's example with the haunted playhouse, and they wanted to put on plays, and maybe the night of their big opening, the big bad, in the scenario, robs the box office receipts before they can, get them. And then they have a choice. Do they keep putting on plays and keep getting robbed, or do they go try to get their money back? I'm not saying that's a perfect example, and it probably doesn't necessarily fit everything, but
No, I think that's a good
Mhm.
example.
you got to be a little flexible.
I think when I'm designing, especially when I'm writing my own type of scenario, I do a couple things that I always keep in mind. One, I kind of just come up with a premise and idea. And from that idea, I write an outline that says, these are the things that I think or I want to happen. And then I kind of think of, from there, I kind of think of what um how the players can get there, and then I let them kind of make the decisions. Because like I think I said this at some point either in one of our conversations recently, like when I write a scenario or a game, I write it with the idea that whatever decision that they make is what I want to see. Like I could write a story, I could just write a story and try and railroad you into it, but that's not what makes it interesting. What makes it interesting is seeing what you guys do with the situations that I put up. And the other
Mhm.
thing is I one, be ready to rewrite the adventure after the first session. That's one reason that I always have, because what you do is in the first session, not just the session
Mhm.
zero, but I mean the first time that they interact with the thing that you set up is you see how they react to it, you can see what they're doing and how they want to experience the story. So you can start tailoring it down from there. You can interact with their characters, you can build the scenario around
Mhm.
them a little bit more. And then also don't have one idea of what success is. Try and understand what the players are going to see as successes. So for example, the Deadlands game that we played recently, um success for me on your in you for you guys wasn't killing the master vampire. Like that's what happened, but that wasn't success. Success would have been if you guys had found a way to load up all the people and get them out of town. That would have been
Mhm.
success for me. Like whatever you guys see as a win for the scenario is what
Mhm.
I'm going to encourage. When you started hunting the vampires, I mean, for me, it worked out. It was like, oh yeah, they want to kill the vampires. Okay, well that's success. Or trap the vampires. Like that was brilliant. Like the pickle barrel trapping the vampire in the larder was brilliant. Like, and so that's all success. And I think that's one thing that I think we've seen the negative thing that can happen when you think of one element of success in that Vaesen game, where you were
Mhm.
so set on that one thing, like us figuring out the mystery as the level of success, that you were disappointed
Mhm.
at the end of the game. But for us, it was like, oh no, we saved the girl, we're cool. Like
Yeah.
we were all very happy about that.
Well, and I think it really comes down to like what type of scenario you're trying to run, because I think when you run like a pre-written module or something like that, you kind of get fixated that these are the goalposts. And in some cases, you have to kind of go scene by scene through the thing. And, it almost is like, well, this is our linear story. You kind of do it. And then some, of course, modules, obviously you don't, there's not like a straight through line through the book. You can go to these things, but you're eventually putting together the piece to hit this final kind of not immutable thing, but this is what they should be going for.
Well,
Um,
that's the point of pre-written modules, though, is
mm,
pre-written modules are usually very railroady. They're very,
mhm,
Yeah.
this happens, this happens, this happens to get here. And that's
mm,
because it's not written for anybody specific. It's written in general.
yeah.
Um it's more like it's a book essentially, not a
Mhm,
role-playing game per se. It gives you so it's a list of suggestions, and like as a GM, and I think this is harder a lot of times, is you have to be able to dissect that pre-written adventure to be like, oh, this is what the players are going to do now. I
mhm,
have to kind of modify this to fit their game.
yeah.
Um, And I think that's why I think it's easier. I also think it's easier to write dungeon scenarios because basically you just set up a bunch of rooms and scenes. Like you just say they go to A, this happens. They go to B, this happens, and anything in the between is skippable. Like you could skip every single room
Sure.
in a dungeon, really,
Yeah.
if it's designed
I
poorly.
I prefer to just make my dungeons like a centipede,
Yeah.
where there's one entrance, one exit, one entrance, one exit.
Or it's
So
a
you don't have a
square.
choice.
It's a square with side rooms, and you could just go one down one side of the square and go to the bad guy. Like if you design a dungeon like that, like if your players aren't like kick open the door and loot every room in the dungeon people, and they just go, wait, can we just go like it's the labyrinth thing, right? It's like, oh well, if she just would have went straight, she would have made it all the way to the castle. Like, I mean, that's the thing is if you design it wrong, like yeah, they could do that. Well, it's kind of like the first. It's kind of like the first day, the first day we played the Deadlands game, and I keep using it as an example because it's so fresh. But
Sure.
like, you guys didn't have any combat or anything because you guys chose to interact with the rooms in a limited way. Like some of that was brilliant, like pulling the curtain, but to get the vampire to roll off the bed under the bed, like that was brilliant, but that wasn't like you didn't need to roll any dice for that. So like that was all. And if you guys would have decided to burn down the building, like burn down the whole town at that point, like I would have been able to, I could have handled that story. Like I could have like the vampires all rush out or something happens. I had ideas, but it was that was up to you. Ultimately that was up to you.
Yeah, and I think that having some backups in order to kind of accommodate your players and their kind of infinite flexibility depending on how much you give them. Because I really think that like and we haven't talked about this, I don't think a lot, but when we talk about reactive characters and proactive characters and like when characters are when players are actually being proactive and making active decisions about what their characters are doing and how they're interacting with the world, it's a hell of a lot of fun for the
Mhm.
players because there's a sense of excitement, there's a sense of like meaning because you're changing things in terms of the story and that you're making the story your own. And that is a really great feeling. And think that sometimes when you're running like a module, it can very much feel like you're being reactive. Okay, well, I go to
Mhm.
this room. DM, what happens to me because I have now entered into room B,
Mhm.
like and I think that that can be a little bit tricky, but when you're putting together your stuff and you kind of like go, okay, well, this is how they're playing it and this is what they're trying to do. I mean, even with Mason, you could tell from my first game and kind of realizing that I had kind of, you know, very much put on tunnel vision. The second game with the Hell Pig, which I thought far more fun and far more
It
interesting,
was very fun.
because we just were able to make it. I was able to go, okay, well, these guys aren't going to follow the script, and they proved me immediately correct by not going to the hotel that was designated for them and not meeting any of the initial NPCs that are supposed to start the mystery and not doing anything that the mystery entails right out of the gate. Like literally, I've never been derailed so fast in a game. I was
Well,
like,
we
okay,
did
well, you
stop
need
at
to
the
go.
bar because it was the first place to warm up. And
Yeah.
then one member of the party was like, "Whoa, do you have any rooms?" Yeah, we have rooms.
Well,
And at that point, that was our base of operations.
players are absolutely agents of chaos. Like you are never
Mhm.
going to be able to. Like we've played together. Like our group has played together at least
Mhm.
3 years. We've been doing our game, our home game, our table game.
Mhm.
3 years
Yeah.
probably. Like I should know what choices you guys are going to make after 3 years. Like I should know, kind of in general, what characters you guys are going to play. But to this day, it's never. Oh, you're going to have a duel with the Odia and just cheat. Oh, I would have never. I I didn't expect that. Still to this day,
You
Well, but
demand
that's
honor, and then you cheat.
yeah.
That's
Like
yeah, no,
you're
but
never gonna.
still,
You're never
it
going
was the
to.
character.
You're never going to be able to compensate for that. And I think for two reasons. One, we all like to role play, so we are all very much in character. We don't know those characters, and we're partially dealing with the player's brain and the character's brain, which is going to just make for those decisions that you don't expect. And I think
Mhm.
that's the fun of the game. Is like that's
Yeah.
why it's fun to set up these situations and have people react to them.
Well, And I've actually got a question for you guys because I think this is an interesting topic for me. Is that sometimes I feel like if the players make such an unexpected decision choice or something like that, um, I feel like there's a few strategies that you could probably do that would be like either a take 5. As the
Mhm.
GM, don't feel like you have to improvise on the spot, a la Critical Role style. Be like, that's a really good question. Let me think about that for a moment and kind of mull it over. Take 5, 10. Go get a drink, let them chew on some chips, and then come back and be like, okay, I've wrapped my head around what you're trying to do. You could just that if it's at a good place to stop for the night, maybe that's your
Cliff
cliffhanger.
cliffhanger that shit.
Be like, oh, you stabbed the Baron? Well, I wasn't. Well, you know what? We've been playing for 4 hours. Okay, next week we'll start with you stabbing the Baron, so I can
We've been
kind of.
playing for 24 minutes. I didn't
It's a little,
expect you guys to just murder everyone in town. I think that's a good cliffhanger.
well, depends on how it goes. Maybe that is a good cliffhanger. Well, this adventure doesn't get started because you killed the plot hooks instead. But I think that those kind of things, you don't have to feel obligated to immediately respond. And I think Fabula Ultima had some good advice that, like, sometimes the players, since they're directing so much of the story, you as the referee, GM, and all that stuff, need to take a moment to be like, okay, well, let me react to your story by taking that internal monologue. And because players get to talk to each other and they get to go, oh, well, let's plan, let's do this. And then, 10 minutes
Right.
later, they get to info dump the DM and be like, that's our final answer. And then the DM has to just be like, computed, done. That's.
Well, yeah, but you as the GM, you do have the advantage of being able to hear them
Mhm.
plan, so you can
Yeah.
start to work with their plan. I mean, like, and small things can be seen like derailing. Like, for example, you have a shapeshifter character in your party, and they turn into a goblin, but they can't, and so they go up to the goblin stronghold, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, do you speak goblin? Well, no. Like, I mean, that's a pretty big derailment, really. Like,
Hey, that was his fault, not
mm,
mine.
well, no,
It
but
was his
that's
plan.
but that's a that could be a derailment. What do you do? Capture
Sure.
them? Do you have them attack them when they can't answer them? Do you have them be confused? Like, that's a I would have never thought that one of the players would do that. I mean, I didn't. I was shocked when it
No,
happened. I was in
yeah,
the
no, it
game.
happened right next to us, and I
And as it was unfolding, you guys are like, what's
and
happening?
and I was sure you didn't plan for I'm gonna go talk to the goblin. Well, do you speak goblin? No.
no, I'm practicing my
Oh.
common, so
Oh.
I'm trying to only speak in common.
It was pretty funny. I'm not gonna lie.
I
But
mean,
I think.
but those are the types of things that, like, if you're not a skilled GM, those would be big derailments.
Mhm.
And that's kind of my suggestion is like, kind of have an idea of what you want to happen in the place, and then, I mean, you just have to deal
Well,
with
yeah,
that sometimes.
crazy stuff happens, and things go a little sideways, even when a player isn't trying to go
Right.
rogue.
Right.
Right?
Well,
Like, you could say they're going rogue a little bit, but they're still trying to further the plot.
Yeah,
Right?
doing
Or
nothing.
the campaign.
I consider doing nothing going rogue more than doing something. Like, if the person just doesn't want to play your game, I consider that going rogue.
but
More
here's one
than
thing I wanna point out though, is that if our friend could have spoken, there we go. If they could speak in good like me, if they
English. If he
if
had
they could
mastered English.
if they could have spoken goblin, I think that there's a part of me that you have to ask yourself, is this a good use of their characters, and is this a cool win for the players? Like, because if they use their resources appropriately and then you as the DM go, well, that's not how I planned it, denied,
No, that
that's.
was it was no, exactly. I mean, that
It was
also
a
could have
clever idea.
right. That also, I
But
mean, that's the other. That's what I'm when I say players are going to do things like,
Mhm.
if you want look, players are going to be clever. Players are going to do things that you could not have anticipated for, and I would encourage people to not always think about that as derailing, because that's what you want. You want them to do clever things and cool things. I mean, you want them to think about it first, like not having common or not having goblin as a language when you're trying to infiltrate the goblin stronghold. Seems like some thoughts that should have gone into the plan beforehand. But it made for a very memorable game, I will say that.
Yeah.
Um, But so and that's what you want, is you want those memorable games, right? So
Yeah,
encourage that. Like that's why I say, like, I think the worst thing a player could do is nothing, or intentionally counter to what you're doing, which, like, intentionally being toxic.
sure.
Where they're just like, no, I'm not engaging with the world. I'm not engaging with the world that you want, that you're building, or what you're trying to say. You know.
So so I think that, kind of the more serious side of it, there is a type of rogue player that um doesn't do the good, kind of is, I don't know, like, is actually kind of a baddie in the scenario. Um and I think that that's the how do I say it? It's basically the like, they've derailed the game, but they've also made people uncomfortable at the same time. You ever experienced that? And like, like how would you go about kind of doing that? Because, like, I know we've read some of those D&D horror stories, and some of the people that like share their table experience and stuff like that. You're just like, oh fuck, I don't know. Ooh.
I
If that player showed up at my table, I
if people start to feel uncomfortable and nobody's deciding to play their X card or say, hey, I don't think I'm comfortable with how the story's going. I think it's a good place for the GM to call a timeout, to call a bathroom break or a drink break, or hey, let's order pizza or something, and then start talking outside of the game, right? Move from outside of the game to your regular social circle and talk about, is this the kind of thing that we want to have going on?
Yeah. Thankfully, I have always gamed with groups of friends. And I feel like this stuff may happen more in, like, pickup games, where you're not
Sure.
as familiar with the, like, you're not necessarily friends outside of the game. Like, you guys all get together in game as to game, but you aren't necessarily all friends. Um I think I haven't experienced that myself, but I think what you have to do in that case is, if one person is making four other people uncomfortable in any social scenario, you have to talk to them about it, which is the most uncomfortable thing that will happen as the organizer and or presenter of what is going on. You're gonna have to say, hey, I know it's what your character would do, but we need you to back off, or, like, you can't come to the game anymore.
yeah.
That sort of thing. Like, that's the worst case scenario. Hopefully you can point it out and they realize, oh, that's probably, hopefully you can kind of
Well,
steer them in the correct direction.
yeah, because I think I have a couple of times in games that we've played over the years,
Mhm.
played a couple of characters that, maybe had some different solutions than other people would come to with some problems. And I even talked about it, right? Like, there was a while there where I was like the okay, let's leave one alive and take him prisoner, and then ask him questions, and then they don't answer, and then my brain suddenly went to, well, I guess we waterboard them, R- right? Because it's cheap and economical and easy to do, and I'm not saying that you should do it, but these are imaginary people doing this to imaginary other things, and I started feeling like this can't be the solution to everything.
I mean, it can,
No. Well,
but
I was
that's
doing it and I wasn't entirely comfortable with how that character was going, because I wasn't trying necessarily to. He wasn't Jack the Torturer. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I'm afraid to tell you that if his answer was to waterboard everyone, yes, he was Jack the Torturer. He
Well,
was.
the
Maybe not
funny thing is,
intentionally, but he got there.
yeah,
but the funny thing is that you'd be surprised at how many D&D groups, when you present them with an interrogation scenario,
Oh, it does.
suddenly it's just like,
They
okay,
turn into
we'll
vicious
just chop off his
monsters.
feet.
Yeah, they
And you're
turn into
like,
well,
what?
let's just start him on. Let's just light his feet on fire. Yeah, like, they turn into vicious monsters.
And you're
Yeah,
like, what was your
that.
alignment again?
That's true.
Awful good.
Um, I don't even remember which character you're talking about, Jeff. That, which is really funny. But the one moment in a game that I can think of recently that was
Mhm.
uncomfortable and tense was the Pathfinder game, when the shootist character pointed the gun at the guy's like, sick, like, intubated sick daughter, Like that was the most tense. Like that was kind of uncomfortable because it's like, well, what happens if he says no, or he doesn't believe him? Like that was a tense. I think that was tense, and I think it made for a good scene in the game. But that was definitely not. I could see that being a moment where some people would have a problem with it. And I think at that point, if I would have had a problem, I would have said, "Hey, I'm kind of uncomfortable where this is going.
Yeah.
Can we either fast forward or what can we take a break? What can we do to make this not happen this way?"
No,
Yeah.
it was shocking. Like I was kind of stunned, and it didn't go sideways, and so I was kind of okay that it sped things up.
And
Maybe.
part of me was like, "Damn, I didn't think of that." No, I'm kidding. That's not what.
I think at
No,
that
to
point,
this
it's
day,
just to
I
have
did.
more than one disruptive play.
Well, I mean, if we would have
I
had
mean,
a lengthy combat in that room, bad
Mhm.
things would have happened.
it wasn't disruptive, or intentionally
Right. No, it wasn't.
disconcerting. That wasn't their intent. But it kind of was. And I think at that point I would have said, hey, we time out.
Mhm.
We need to
So
really think. We need to talk about this a little bit more and think about an alternate plan here.
Yeah.
I think is which maybe we even did. I don't remember, but
I
I think
think you
that's one
guys'
of those
plan
moments.
was charge, and then he was just like, "Aha, I've got an idea."
Well, that's always the plan. The plan is
well,
always
yeah.
charge.
I mean, we didn't want the lengthy combat, but Mike, you were the GM in that. Do you remember?
Mhm.
I mean, you helped de-escalate the situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was so like I mean, obviously, so the thing about this particular scenario is that, you know, it's he took a hostage, right? Now, in this case, it was different because he was taking the hostage from the bad guy, quote unquote. And so it's like, I mean, just because the guy is a villain who has obviously done bad things to set him up as the villain, I was a little taken aback though that because I mean, a lot of times when you play heroes, you go, okay, well, there are certain lines we don't cross, and taking a quote unquote dying girl hostage in order to prevent the father from rampaging seems kind of like an odd solution for a hero to take. Because like what if the father was like, you wouldn't dare, and he's like, what, I dare, like
Well,
that
yeah,
would have
like what
been.
if he called the bluff? Yeah, that was the
Yeah.
thing. Is like that, yeah.
And so basically as the DM I had to go, well, I don't really feel like putting this other player in that position where I call his bluff, because what father is going to go like, oh well, it's just my daughter, he won't
Well, and what
know.
fun is that in a
Well,
game?
and his
Yeah.
and I mean he was trying to cure his sick daughter.
Right.
Not he didn't make the best choices, right? I'm not
Hmm.
defending the choices, but he was trying to save someone that he loved, and
Yeah.
he did bad things to further those pursuits. And
Mhm.
so he didn't want her to die. Like
Right.
he'd already shown that in a lot of ways.
So there's a point where you go, okay, well, am I
And
am I creating the problem if I continue down this road, or is this a
yeah.
reasonable exit ramp and all that kind of stuff? And I thought it was a reasonable exit ramp, so I
Yeah.
said, okay, you
And I
win.
think
You're
that's
the
and
bigger villain.
I think that's a good I think that's a good example of a situation that where like X card or something might come up, is because
It is.
it's an uncomfortable scene. But we
Mhm.
talked it out, and the GM made decisions that de-escalated and everything like that. And I think that's why I brought it up, is because I think that's a good example of
Mhm.
a scene that very well could be like, we need to take a break, that was handled really really well, and brought down and talked down.
Mhm.
Like what happens when heroes don't make heroic decisions, like that's, you could have a whole game of like
Yeah,
that.
what what would happen if you tried to sell another character into slavery or something like that, or
Yeah, I will say, in that particular game, that particular character wasn't a hero, because he did nothing to indicate he was a hero. He cheated in a duel, he took a hostage, I don't remember what else, but he definitely wasn't, I don't think I would call him I don't know,
Exhibits.
antisocial behavior.
I was gonna say alternative problem solving.
it's true. But
Which is it's good to have a player like that, because they do make things interesting. But you can
but
sometimes have them go too far.
and this is where session zeros are important, because obviously we within, even in our group, we talk a lot about like what we're planning on playing and all those kind of things, so we don't surprise each other with like really fucked up situations that
Well, don't surprise each other by going too far. Because we were all like, because we were all surprised in both of those instances. We were surprised, but we weren't disconcerted. Let's put it that way.
Right.
We weren't
It didn't
shocked or
enter
horrified.
RPG horror story territory.
Right. Not even close. It was actually really good. It was
Yeah.
really tense.
Yeah.
It was a really tense, good scene. But I sometimes those scenes are necessary for games to be memorable. At least slightly uncomfortable, because that's how good stories get told. Like if every movie you watched was just comfortable all the time or predictable, they wouldn't be any fun.
You stole that from me. Hey, give it back. Oh, okay, here you go.
Yeah, here you go.
The quickest 30-second movie ever.
Here's our amicable and peaceful resolution to this situation.
Don't
I'm
take
not saying it's a bad.
Okay,
I'm not
I
saying it's a
won't.
bad resolution. I'm saying it's pretty quick.
Yeah.
It's like if
It's
John
fair.
Wick would have met those gangsters and they were like, "That's a nice car," and then they never went to his house. Like John Wick's the shortest gangster movie ever.
John Wick. Thank you. The end.
Yeah. That's not how stories are told. So sometimes some of that's important, but you got to know everybody's limits. And we're all very familiar with each other.
And honestly, in both those cases, I don't think the player was trying to go rogue. I think they were trying to shortcut maybe, but I don't think they were trying to go rogue and derail stuff. I think they were trying to play their character and come up with alternative solutions.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes some games horror stories are harder, is because you don't have that familiarity with the people as players. Like you don't know
like
their
convention
mindset.
games are weird because you don't know you literally don't know who you're playing with. Most of my experiences at conventions have been great. They've been fantastic, with a bunch of people there that are going to help other people learn a game.
Well, you might be playing a character like you wouldn't normally play either. Like
Sure.
I remember we played Aberrant, that White Wolf superhero game. I played it at a convention, and I don't have a ton of convention games under my belt, but I played in this game, and they had given me, because everybody had kind of chosen their characters by the time we showed up, and I had been given the character, the Human Bullet, which was a person whose powers were, the smaller he shrunk, the faster he could fly. And he literally was a human bullet. Like he shot through people. And I was like, I don't know if I'm comfortable playing a character that visibly throws himself through other people.
Yeah.
And the character was hard for me. I was like, well, what are we doing in this fight? Well, you know what you do. Okay. You know,
so aim for the top of his foot.
Yeah, like.
Well, there was kind of like one of those things where you start getting into, what is it, the boys, and you're like, ooh, there's I'm okay not role playing that scene. That's fine.
Yeah, no,
exactly.
There are plenty of things that I consume as media that I don't want to role play, that I just don't.
Yeah,
you know.
So. Well, don't think too hard, Brent. Just move on. All right. Well, so I think we just wanted to kind of chat about it. It's kind of fun, we get to talk about some of the games we played in, some of the things we've heard. Now, obviously, if you want to hang out on the subreddit, RPG horror stories, you can see a lot of situations and how they unfold. I find it kind of interesting to read those sometimes. Some of the horror stories are really quite insane, and then they remind me how good I have it at my tables. So,
well, yeah, it's always interesting to just find out how people violate the social contract, like how they're just like, oh no, this limitation doesn't exist for me in social circles, and it's like, well, what?
Well, and I think getting together online and playing with just random people online is probably the easiest way to find those people. They're just like,
I think going to a gaming store and having to deal with that in person. So? I think
I don't know. There's something about it that I think if you went to a game,
like
even going to a gaming store, I still think you'd have people that, because they're like in person, there's still a little bit of holdback. But if you're just like some Discord ID number, I feel like they're just like, oh, I can be really edgelordy right here and do whatever I want.
That's probably too to agree, but that's also an easier conversation to have. That's an email that says you don't get to come back to the game anymore. Goodbye. Versus that person that shows up, like, or if it's their house that you're playing at, and you're like, well, we don't want to have the game with them anymore. Where can we play now? Like, there's a bunch of like logistical things that happen. Like, hopefully, if
Yeah.
anybody's in one of these situations where you have a derailer or someone who makes the table uncomfortable, you can have an adult conversation with them and help the whole table through it. But if you're choosing to run a game, guess who? You're probably the one that's going to have to do it. So be ready for that.
Yeah. So with that, thank you all for listening. We appreciate everybody taking the time to hang out with us. Of course, leave comments, your likes, your stories, all that jazz. And Jeff, how can they talk to us outside of YouTube?
They can look for at Rollwise on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, or they can email us rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
Yeah, go ahead, go out there, find us. We're around everywhere. Leave comments. Please
Mhm.
subscribe. We're on our march towards 1,000, hopefully this year. So yeah, help out if you can. And as always, roll well, roll wise, be safe out there. Thank
Thanks.
you, everybody.
Take care, everybody.